Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of How to Draw Dragons with the Dragon Story. So, after posting several YouTube videos and kind of seeing what sort of videos I wanted to post, I realized I probably want to do a lot more of the simple or step-by-step videos. And so today I just figured I would start with just a simple how-to. For now, I'm going to stick with a typical dragon. In my world, I call them the natural species of dragons. So they're kind of the standard looking dragons. And I'm going to stick with a profile view just to start with. Just to help, I just want to build the foundation of how to draw dragons. And then I'll kind of expand that and then start doing examples, moving the dragon head around and ways and techniques to draw that. But I just wanted to lay down the foundation work of any basic dragon drawing. And so my equipment is an iPad Pro, Apple Pencil. I use this glove so that my hand doesn't touch it. I end up resting my hand a lot. And I use a texture, like a screen protector that is matte texture, so it kind of feels like paper, which is really nice. So to start with, the number one thing I can push the most is shapes. Back up. The number one thing is picking the right brush. So for sketching, I use a charcoal brush called Vine Charcoal, and I just make the eraser the same so I get the same effect. There we go. Okay, back to shapes. Okay, now back to shapes. So when you imagine a dragon's head, you need to think of the volume of its head and the basic shape. Okay, I figure we go with a pretty typical standard looking one. So it's kind of using a reference of a sort of like a dog or a horse. And so they kind of have this main section of their head here. And then they have their snout. You can kind of use these shapes to start mapping out how big this dragon is, kind of where its jawline is. Do you want its head a lot longer? Do you want it shorter? And I'm starting with circles because that's kind of the shape of the dragon that I want. I'll do more videos later on where I show how if we want to use different shapes, we can get different results or just different styles. So I start with these shapes, but one thing that is super important to keep in mind is that these aren't just circles, they are spheres. And this will make more sense later. And you don't always have to draw these. I'm just drawing these circumference lines to help indicate that these are spheres. So when we draw shapes, we still think about them in 3D space, so that the shape is moving around and then it's going back in 3D space. So that's super important. That's just one of the foundational things. So if you're drawing on paper, just draw this really smooth. You kind of map out the snout and the nose. If you want more of a pointed nose, you can do like half sphere and then convert it to something kind of squarish right there. And then we just kind of connect the lines, because this is mapping out our volume, and then we build to that. And so I'll swoop back here to kind of make the jawbone, mapping out the jaw, the basis of the head, the nose, the snout. And so then the eye is super important. And sometimes I'll just sketch it in like this, because depending on the eye placement, you can get different looks to your dragon. That one's pretty standard. Let me undo this. Sometimes if the eye is like up super close, yikes. It can give your dragon like a different feel. If it's really far apart, and remember, we're thinking in 3D space. All those things contribute to the personality and style of the dragon. So right now I'm sticking with a profile view. I have to imagine the snout. Usually there is this little divot there is where the eyes come up. And there's multiple ways to do eyes. I tend to lean on human style eyes because I like my dragons to have a personality to them. Oops. And so I'm just kind of sketching this all in lightly. Then let's figure out the chin. You know, if he's got these rows of teeth in here, I like imagining how they will all connect, even if it's his mouth is closed. There we go. Maybe the jaw needs to be a little bit bigger. But overall, we started with these two shapes, once again, to help create the form. Let's kind of figure out a placement for the nostril. And one of the things that's kind of a signature thing that I love to do is the cheekbone horn. So I'll just kind of map that out. I mean, really, it's kind of a triangular shape. But when I go to draw that in, I'll use that curved line because it's curving around it in 3D space. I actually think that's too big. So I'll come back in here. You know, because the typical dragons, the naturals in my world, will have like a couple of cheekbone horns. Usually it's just the nobles that have one single one. And I do the cheekbone horns as opposed to like, sorry, I'm gonna undo this. You probably hear me talking about this all the time, but I don't necessarily like the scales on the jaw because I feel like it gets in the way of the neck. Whereas if the horns grow out of the cheekbone, they grow outward and away from the body. So it gives the dragon a slightly more menacing look. So it still kind of has a similar aesthetic, but it would have to rotate its neck. I mean, this is probably getting a little too close, but it's a smaller horn. And so I like giving it plenty of space. Just keeping it all light. Oh, the other thing you have to keep in mind is where you want what sort of horn structure. Sometimes I would actually map that out at the very beginning. I guess I'm cheating because I knew where I'm going with this drawing. But the horn structure is super important. So if I just scroll this down, or scale it down, you know, and we have all sorts of options of horns. And so we can just kind of map out what we like the best. Oh, and the reason I say sometimes it's good to map that out from the beginning is because the horn structure is so significant. It's such a major part of the skull. Let me undo that. You know, it's like the crowning cap. And so it needs a good foundation and good connection to the skull. So sometimes I'll just map it out with a line. Sometimes I know exactly what shape I'm going for. Let's just kind of give this a slight curve to it. A lot of times, because in my world, I use that style of horn for the noble species of dragon. And we all want to make sure this all connects. So if we're attaching this space onto here, it needs to have a really solid foundation. You know, if the horn comes out like that, it's really weak. It'll break off. But what that does is that illustrates some issues I have with these early sketches. And that's okay, you just erase. Sometimes this back horn is always a pain in the butt, so sometimes I don't even draw it. And so then, okay, we want this guy to have like some scales. And the scales on the dragon also help indicate its personality. Like if you're doing round scales, that helps soften the look of the dragon, or you can do sharp, and that gives it a little bit of a different flavor. And so then we also have to map out the neck. So a lot of times when I do the neck, I'll kind of figure out the spine. You know, like if it attaches to the back of the skull here, what's it doing? And there's muscles that can build out on top of that. I think that neck was too thick. And it's important to try and think of this as a cylinder that is like a hose wrapping around. Because then you basically have a sphere, a bent cylinder. We map this out. So then I'll step back and look at it. My line started getting a lot darker. It's probably ideal to be a little bit more lighter. So one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm looking at this and I'm like, this sort of takes this really quick bend right there. I like the flow of my dragons to be a little bit more accurate. So I'm going to redraw this horn. Again, I'll keep it simple. I like keeping it thinner up there, thicker down here. The other thing I do is I don't always imagine the horns being perfect circles. Sometimes I imagine it's like more like a triangle or like a variant thereof. Okay, and right now I'm being super sloppy, and that is quite all right, because, see, my iPad keeps doing that. We're kind of mapping out. I started really light because I figured that would be helpful for most people that are starting to draw. But honestly, when I do this sketch out layer, I just start scribbling, and it's because I know digitally I have control over it. And so when we map out these scales right here, you definitely want to make sure they fan out or they flow with the neck. Okay, so then I sit here and look at it and I'm like, okay, great. I think this guy would be cooler if his horns were a little bit bigger. There we go. Yeah. So now he's got these like long sword-like horns. And he's got these awesome cheekbone horns. I'm going to push that one out a little bit more to give room for these two. Again, keeping it pretty simple. I am going to change this because it's just complaining, like right now, it looks like the placement of those horns are really close to the back of the dragon's skull. And I was just complaining about that. So I want to make sure they feel like they are part of the outer part of the dragon. So they're like on this side of it, not back there. So when he rotates his head, it's not digging into his neck. Obviously, if he rotates his head enough. Oh, totally lost the jaw. There we go. You know, because the jaw will kind of connect back to the back of the skull like that. So first step is just laying down the shapes, focusing on the form and the structure. Let me lay down a couple of these like muscle lines, because that neck muscle sort of does this crisscrossy thing, but I'll talk about that more later. But anyway. Okay, so then from here, I will take it, I'll split this up into 2 videos, but these are a lot shorter than my full-on process videos. So here, I've mapped everything out, and now I just want to kind of ink it in. And so if you're drawing digitally, you can just create a new layer and soften this one. But if you're drawing traditional, you're just going to have to get really good at drawing this light. Since I've been drawing digitally, I've gotten really sloppy at my rough sketches because I know I can just adjust it like this. So anyway, so step 1 and then step 2, I'm just going to be inking this and create a final piece. So thanks for watching. Be sure to tune into the next one and finish your step-by-step how to draw a dragon head. Thanks for watching.